Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Kingdom of Dreams podcast and Making of Stories. I'm your host, Jawad Mir. Today we have a repeat guest. I had Mark Solomon on previously twice for DreamWorks Chicken Run as well as Shark Tale. Today he's here to talk about Tim Burton's Frankenweenie, which was a stop motion remake of an original short produced way back in 1984. I actually missed that film completely, the 2011 version, and recently discovered it and decided to speak to Mark about it. And do check out his book, Over the Shoulder, which talks about film editing techniques and stories from his experience. And without further ado, here's my conversation with Mark Solomon. Well, welcome again. Talk about Tim Burton's uh, Frankenweenie. And this
Hmm.
film, somehow I missed it. I did not know that there was a stop motion animation, black and white remake, if you want to call it. I just saw it just this morning and absolutely loved it. And to
It's sweet,
see
isn't it?
it is. It's a very, in a typical Tim Burton, his fascination with death, and then he just
Hmm.
kind of gives a little more, different twist on it. And yeah, obviously based on Frankenstein, but really, really well done, and really enjoyed it. And to see you, and I think was it Chris Lebenzon who was also involved with the film
Chris
too?
Levinson. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I had him on a few months ago
Oh,
about
did
Alice in
you?
Wonderland. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, but a great film. Thank you so much for being part of it. It's amazing. I'd love to talk more about it.
It was a good experience. I enjoyed working on that movie. Chris, I think at the time, as I remember, Tim Burton was also making Dark Shadows
Yes.
at the same time, and so Chris was sort of half on that movie and half on our movie, as we were like pushing on with Frankenweenie. And yeah, it was a good experience. I was in London then, so there's a big studio set up near the Olympic site in London
Okay.
because it was around the same time that they were getting ready for the host the Olympics in London, and we were right across the street and at a little studio called Three Mills Studios, and they took over a bunch of the space to do Frankenweenie. And it was funny because usually on a movie you think it's a big deal. There's like hundreds of people and they're spending millions of dollars. And then across the street they were putting together the Olympics site, which is dwarfed the movie, made it seem like small potatoes. It was interesting to see the scale of it.
That is kind of cool. That's really cool. Yeah, what, I mean, you have, obviously, I had you on last time we spoke about Shark Tale. You worked on Space Jam. We worked on a whole bunch of different films, and now that you've written the book, Over the Shoulder. But what was your involvement? Like, how did you get on board on a Tim Burton film? How did you work with him before? I may know some of the answers, but I'm just trying to get the audience sort of entangled into this conversation with
Sure.
them.
Well, the producer who works with Tim Burton on animated things is Allison Abate, who I
Mm-hmm.
worked with on Space Jam back in the
Mm,
day. So we hit it off well. And she's a turned out to be a good friend and a great producer. I really admire her. And she brought me on to handle the animation side of and to work with the animation crew and animation director and her and some with Tim. But he sort of had his own little setup in his place where he lived and another part of London where Chris worked. And so I would jump back and forth between the at first it was just us in the studio near the Olympic site in East London. And it was about developing the storyboards and, putting together a story reel like the way most animated features go. And then as we got closer, there was more back and forth with Tim and Chris as he sort of handled sort of like the back third of the movie with all the monster elements, but it was like a monster party. It was what Tim Burton was going for. And it was fun to work with him. It was very interesting because he has such a distinctive style that even when he wasn't there, you could see what he would do. That was the way that we played with it. Like, what would Tim do here? What would he like? And it was great fun to sort of project what a Tim Burton movie would look like this Frankenweenie, because we had a good model from the original short, the live action short with Shelley Duvall as the mom.
mm-hmm.
And but this was the first, feature length treatment of the story. And and it was done in this unusual style that we had. He was very committed to doing it in black and white, and we wanted to make it feel big. So it was both in widescreen, so like the aspect ratio was wide, like 2:3:5,
Right.
and it was stereoscopic. So it was black and white movie with 3D and widescreen, and sort of playing with how you can how with a new tool to play with, like how to tell a story, what you can do differently given that aspect ratio and the black and white and the
Yeah.
3D. It's fun.
I thoroughly enjoyed the black and white contrast and the shadows that were in there. And it just I mean the protagonists and all the characters, I would say they had very similar design to what we saw in Corpse Bride, which was I think
Yes.
way before that. But again, the black and white really transformed into something completely fresh despite the similarities.
Hmm.
And what I love about Tim Burton films, he has this ability, and I think that goes for great directors. They have this ability to make the audience feel that this is the world that only exists, and you are
Ah,
immersed in it. And with
yeah.
limited number of characters, and the storytelling is amazing. Had you seen the original Frankenweenie when it came out way back in
Sure,
'84?
sure. Um, I didn't. We saw it before we started working on this movie, but I think I'd seen it earlier as well. It was great fun, and a lot of the scene where where they go up in the attic with the lightning and the transformation to bring him back to life was very close to the live action version. I think that's the way that he imagined it when he was 15 when he thought of this idea. And so we really stayed true to that. And it was just, yeah.
It's
We knew that that's what it wanted to be. Like that was sort of the touchstone for how the movie should feel and look. So that was our reference point to go back to, which was great to have.
So th this film, the original short was, I think, pretty much the launching pad for Tim Burton. I'm sure he had done stuff before, but that was his first main short project that came out. Working with him on something that came out like a remake of an earlier part of his career, like when things are different in your career, when you're basically a nobody and you make
Mhm.
that film and it takes you to the next step, revisiting that and working with Tim Burton on that, did he ever sort of talk about the original project and the obstacles that he had to get it made to you, or versus
Well,
this one, obviously because it's Tim Burton now?
Well, the difference was then, I mean, could tell that he was talented. And so they gave him money to make this short because he was
Yeah.
an animator primarily. And so he had been working on some of the Disney features as an animator or various projects. They could see that he was talented, wanted to see what he could do. He said he had this story. They gave him the money to produce this short subject, relatively short subject. And when they saw it, they said, it's too dark. We can't release this. So I think when Tim Burton, as he grew in his career with other working at other studios like Warner Brothers for Batman, and then he did Alice in Wonderland for Disney, and it was a big success. Like Alice in Wonderland was a big success, and they said, I think the conversation was something like, Tim, whatever you want to do, we'll support you. And he said, well, I want to make a animated version of Frankenweenie that people never really got to see distributed. So with a relatively limited budget, we were able to, put together a stop motion version of the story that he loved from when he was younger.
Amazing.
That's sort of that's the way I saw it get put together.
Were you directly working with him in the post-production, or
Yeah, yeah.
was it, yeah. What
It
is
was,
he like to work with?
he's very interesting because some directors like to talk a lot and are very verbal, and that's not what he's like. He watches and sort of, without talking much, you sort of get a sense of what he feels. And then when he gets very frustrated, he draws furiously, like a little sketch of what he intends. And you go, "Oh, that's what you're talking about." And so then someone takes that little sketch and turns it into a production element, and it gets made like that. But there's not a lot of dialogue with him, or there wasn't at the time when I was working with him. It was mostly communicated through, he would either like sort of demonstrate what he was talking about, or move the pieces around, or draw them. And that's the way that we would sort of get direction from Tim. And it was good
That's
that
interesting.
Allison had worked with him before, so she understood that that was his process and the way he liked to work.
That's interesting because if aside from his films like Batman, Alice in Wonderland, but films similar to Nightmare Before Christmas, Corpse Bride, Edward Scissorhand, and Big Fish. I mean, there's so many names. He has that in those films. There's a lot of quiet scenes, which I
Hmm.
feel like reflects because he likes to emote to the audience visually more than,
Yeah, yeah.
verbally. Um, but seeing him, just hearing from you articulate himself in a visual way or in a quiet way is quite fascinating. It reflects in his films as well.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it comes across. He works with good screenwriters. I mean, like I think story is not the thing that he loves the most. He loves the impact of the visual image, and looks at a blank screen and says, "What do you want to see here? Like, what would be the great thing to see here in if you're doing Sleepy Hollow or Batman or one of these, big well-known kind of stories?" And and that's to his credit. I mean, it is a visual medium, and you get a lot of the world of the story is what comes out of his head. That's what he's great at.
What were some of was there a specific scene or overall production challenges or, sorry, post-production challenges that you guys came across that you remember? I know it's been about a good 11 years that you can recall.
What was it? There were lots of things. I mean, getting the family dynamic right with like Edward and his parents. I mean, the voice cast was wonderful. I mean, Martin
Yeah.
Short and Catherine O'Hara did a lot of the voices, and they knew each other before, and they're both very, very funny, talented people. And it was a joy to sit in at the recording sessions and see what they would do with the lines and the characters, and then trying to put that into a scene with the boy and try to get, a believable family dynamic out of that was uh, was challenging. And also we felt that one of the things that we talked about early on in production, I remember, is that we felt stuck in that attic. They built this beautiful set of Victor up in the
Mm.
attic, and we had to like, where other places can we be? Like, where else can we do this? And Allison came up with, shooting something in the boy Bob's garage and coming up with other things like as part of the school, trying to get the the voice of the teacher right, Mr. Rice Krusky. I mean, that was a challenge to get right. I can't remember the actor's name.
Martin Landau?
Landau, Martin Landau.
Landau, yeah.
He was wonderful, but while we were working out the scenes and the characters before he was cast, trying to imagine what he was like and what his role, how scary he would be to the kids, and what the comic possibilities that you could do with him was a lot of fun and took a lot of time. Getting the Sparky getting hit by the car when he's chasing the baseball, that took a lot. Because like how much can you show? Like how much of the game do you need to see? How much of the car and the dog do you need to see? Or how little can you show and make it clear what's going on? And I mean, we sort of wound up with a very tasteful, PG rated um, crash. But that doesn't happen right away. That takes time to arrive at that.
Yeah. No, most certainly. And were you ever were you brought on after the production was done, or were you part of the
No,
production
animation
process?
style is the editor's on early.
Yeah.
So as soon as they start, once this, we had a wonderful screenwriter, John August, I think he had done Big Fish before with Tim.
Hmm.
um, Had a script, and so then they start drawing storyboards and getting production design. And then once there's enough storyboards to have a scene together, then they start cutting it together right away. So it's almost like pre-production, so that the animators and all the other departments on the crew can see what the story looks like, sort of running in time, like what a sequence looks like from beginning to end. Where editing, you sort of introduce the element of time, like how long does this scene take, and how much of the characters do we see, and how do we set it up, and then based on that, they can go ahead and animate. So I was on early on that show.
So it's interesting in your career, right? You have done Space Jam, which is live action mixed with animation.
Mhm.
Then you did Shark Tale, which is computer animation, 3D. Then you
Yeah.
did stop motion. What were the three differences as an editor, if any, that you came across, or was it a similar process in terms of putting everything together?
Some things are the same and some things are different. I mean,
Which would be,
Space Jam was 2D, like hand drawn
right?
over live action. I did Stuart Little 2, which was, you know, digital animation over live action, and then stop motion and computer generated animation. I mean, the interpreting the script and getting it ready for production, that's the same in all of them.
Right.
Once it gets how it gets shot, and then what happens afterwards is different based on the production style. Like Space Jam, we had to do all these complicated overlays so you could see the background that Bugs and Daffy are walking through, as you see a line drawing of Bugs and Daffy moving across it, so and you can start to create the feeling of that the animated character is touching a real world surface. And then in animation, I mean, in stop motion, everything is done in one go. Like that's not layers upon layers as it is in computer animation. In stop motion, they build a little set like on a tabletop
Hmm.
model, like a model train set. And and so they have little trees. And in Victor's house, they had a suburban house on a real street. And in the kitchen, they had little tiny miniature spice rack that someone had to make by hand. And the trees have all the leaves like glued on by hand. And the grass has to be laid. And everything is planted there at once. And so when the figures, the characters like Sparky, like I have a Sparky right
Yeah, I
there.
see him. I see him.
That's about the size of the dog, and so then the scale of the boy had to be above that, and the scale of the adults had to be above that, and the house they lived in had to be big enough to accommodate them. And so we had all those elements, and the characters really move through instead of like having a wireframe like you would in computer animation, or just do one layer at a time. But they're all fun. The thing that's charming about this movie and Chicken Run, that are the two stop motion
Right.
movies,
Right.
and that everything is there, and it has sort of a handmade feeling to it, because some animator is manipulating the characters frame by frame, and moving the camera, moving the characters, getting expression out of these little figures. And there's an innocence to it that suited this story well. And a lot of stories, I mean, like that the charm of stop motion is very well suited to certain kinds of stories, and I think this was one.
Right. And chicken. I completely agree with you. There's such a fascination of stop motion, at least with me, and I'm sure audiences as well. The most recent stop motion by Aardman that came out, Wallace and Gromit.
Uh-huh.
I forget what it's called. It's
The Awakening, something Awakening?
yeah. I'm gonna find out.
Dawn
Just
Awakening.
Wallace and Gromit, latest film. It was called Vengeance Most Foul.
Vengeance Most Foul, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's the return of. Have you seen the shorts of Wallace and Gromit, the original shorts?
Sure.
So it's basically the return of one of their nemesis, the I forget the character's name, but the penguin, the
Feathers.
Feathers McGraw. Feathers be
Yeah, yeah,
gone.
yeah.
So, even watching that just recently and watching this now and Chicken Run, they just have so much. I think the key word you mentioned was so innocence to it, and
Mhm.
you just feel like you can just grab and,
Yeah,
feel
yeah,
them
yeah.
while you're
Yeah,
watching the
it's
film.
tactile.
And yeah. Um, but Chicken Run was much more, it was about the Great Escape and kind of approach, but it was more brighter, more colorful, more
Hmm.
humorous, positive tone. This was a complete contrast, right? Um,
Yeah, yeah.
Dealing with death, black and white, and everything. When you're working on something like that, as a yourself as an editor, was it something that was really, not necessarily challenging, but just to be in that vibe all the time versus something that's more happy note? Does that make any impact on you?
Yes. Yes. That's why, because you work on, you spend all day with the material, weeks and weeks. I mean, it was the different movie that affected me the most. There was a movie called The Tale of Despero, where it's about a mouse and sort of like a fairy tale kind of setting, but
Right,
he ends
right.
up in a dungeon, and this being with this mouse in a dungeon for weeks at a time got me down, and I couldn't figure out why I was feeling badly. But it was because I spent all this time feeling like I would, because you have to inhabit the character. I've heard said, I think Paul Hirsch said that an editor isn't a job, it's a being a host organism, that you sort of take on the story and the characters and you sort of live with it in your body. And that's the only way
100%.
to sort of really inhabit what you're doing, to sort of really tell the story from the inside. And in a story like this, I mean, it has so much charm that the darkness of the story is very PG dark. It's not really too tough. It's not like
Yeah,
Saw or some movie about, where things are really horror, but it's a young person's horror where they have, and Disney was sensitive to this when we did previews. They talked about, what did you think of this? They didn't call them scares, like when the cat's face jumps out over a tombstone or the bat sort of jumps forward. They called them jumps. Like, what did you think of the jumps? And how old, if you have younger brothers or sisters, how old do you think you need to be to see a movie like this? Because it's not the same. It's not like a Teletubbies audience. It's a young audience, but it's still, you have enough sophistication that you don't get sort of put off by, some kids really don't like scary music. And Danny Elfman wrote a wonderful score for this that really, I mean, he's great at getting that Tim Burton vibe of dark, but not too dark, where there's a lot of, charm and engaging and, quirky instrumentation and that kind of thing that really helps carry the feeling for what the movie's going to feel like.
I do think if the film was made today, I feel the younger audience, the fact that they've been exposed to tablets and phones so much, I don't
Hmm.
know. I feel that they probably would be okay with it if this was made back then for the ages 10 or 11 and up. I have no data to back this up, but I just feel based on my kids and the kids that I
How
see.
old are they?
Well, they're much older now, but 15 and
Uh-huh.
13, but I see younger kids. I think 5 plus can probably watch this now. I genuinely feel that
Could
now
be
because they're
right.
exposed to so much stuff nowadays.
I remember when my daughter first saw Tim Burton, I think she saw Nightmare Before Christmas and Corpse Bride, and she was fascinated by this dark story world that is new to them. When you're young, when you're that young, you don't really see a lot of stories like that, and that he can sort of walk that line where you sort of safely scare a young audience is something that's special for them. And yeah, she really enjoyed that stuff. You
That's
feel
really
cool. You
cool.
feel like a cool older kid, I think, when you can take on being a little bit scared at a story.
100%. Were there any stories from working on the film that you can remember that you want to share with the audience? Any story about editing, or it could be just working with Tim or working with Chris or the actors.
Well, the thing that was the most fun was was, that was the one show that I was nominated for an Ace Award, and that the movie was up for an Oscar. And so for the one time when I was able to go with Chris, the co-editor, and with Allison to, an awards dinner and to be nominated was a great experience. I mean, that was such a validation. It was great to be in the room with people who are the peers that are the most professional and the most experienced, and to feel part of that room where Spielberg is with Michael Kahn, and Walter Murch is there, and all these people that are sort of looked up to as idols of the editing world, and to be a part of that. Um, I mean, yeah, we didn't win, but being in the room was the prize. And to have that experience was, it's very encouraging professionally, and it has its own reward, you know. I mean, you feel like the people recognize your work.
Yeah. I mean, that's the greatest achievement for any artist is that the recognition that you get and people appreciate the work, not you necessarily, but the work that you have done.
Yeah, yeah.
That means a lot to an artist. Um, Chris, what is he like? Again, I think he's a wonderful human being. I've talked to him. He's lovely, very approachable. But just working with him, what was he like? His work with Tim Burton's over God knows how many films.
Yeah, they had their own sort of private language together.
Yeah,
And he was very protective of that, of working with Tim, which I understood. I mean, I was sort of we worked in two different locations, and once in a while we would work together when we had a screening coming up, or I would like offer to help out, like coming up with temp music and doing those kind of things. And he was very, very committed and very focused on getting the best movie out of it he could. And working with Tim, who is not that articulate, that they had built up a sort of private way of working together that was fascinating to see, and and clearly very talented. And Tim Burton's isn't the only director Chris works with. I mean, and all
yeah,
those movies look good, and it's because he's a very talented editor.
yeah. No, he is for sure. Um, just as we sort of wrap up, in terms of, when a film is finished and is shown at a screening or a public
Mhm.
screening or a test screening, whatever that is, or premiere, do you remember that experience of gauging the audience reaction first time?
Sure. Well, we did previews, and and that those are always sort of a mixed bag, because some things play well, and some things are sort of not quite finished yet, so you really can't tell what the reaction is. And for the previews for that movie were sort of a mixed bag. We tried to try to tease out what's valuable from that experience and what was better to just not worry about and just carry on and make our own thing. And then going to a premiere, but everyone's just excited that the movie's now completely finished. And I had, I didn't, wasn't around like through the end phases of like the mix and the sound and the post-production. So seeing it with fresh eyes at the end, seeing it with an audience who, with like a cast and crew screening, and a premiere. They had a premiere at, on Hollywood Boulevard, and Disney really put on a nice premiere for the movie. It's a great feeling of completion. That's what you get from seeing it finished for the first time, is you feel like, yes, yes, that work is done. It reached an audience. I was like someone at my door.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay, give me a sec. I'll be right
Yeah,
back.
no, yeah, no problem.
Sorry, you'll have to cut that.
Yeah, yeah, I will. I will. Don't worry. Yeah. So, tell me just, I know we talked about your book. I know you probably have to go, but we talked about your book last time, Over the Shoulder, which you have in the back over
Mhm.
there. Just you have a book tours coming up, and just to kind of summarize your book again, just so people who watch this who are into filmmaking or editing can reach out and grab this book from Amazon or wherever they can get it from.
Thanks, Joe. Thank you. Yes, it's about over the shoulder. It's about my experience as an editor and the sort of principles of visual storytelling and what it's like to be a freelance editor and like how to sort of navigate the sort of freelance world of being a creative editor and the principles of the context of the work. It's intended for young filmmakers and people doing online video looking to use editing to make it more memorable and emotional. And it's fun.
Amazing.
People are finding it useful and appealing, which is very satisfying for me. It's my gift to the next generation of editors.
No, I read it when you first sent me a copy, and I really enjoyed it, and it was, just
Thank you.
it's very enjoyable reading as well. And I mean, all these books that you see here, I only connect to film related books more than anything
Uh-huh.
else. So that was certainly a fun read. So thank you so much for doing that. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. My pleasure, Joe. It's good to talk to you again.